Think of the world's great cities. New York, London, Tokyo, Paris. Their names evoke powerful images and a clear sense of identity. Now, think of China. You probably picture Beijing's Forbidden City or Shanghai's futuristic skyline. But what about Chongqing, Chengdu, or Tianjin? These are not small regional towns or even mid-sized cities. They are sprawling metropolises, each with a population that dwarfs that of Rome, Berlin, or Chicago. In fact, China has over a dozen cities with more than 10 million people, yet most of them remain completely anonymous to the outside world. The story of China's hidden giants begins with its geography, a tale of two profoundly different lands stuck within one border. On one hand, you have the China that fills our imaginations and our news feeds. This is a land of sprawling plains, huge rivers, and a coastline where basically all of the activity is. On the other hand, there is a vast, empty, and imposing China, a realm of large and increasing deserts and towering mountains. This isn't just a casual observation, it's the single most important factor in understanding the country's population. In 1935, a Chinese demographer named Hu Hanwang drew a simple diagonal line on a map, stretching from the city of Haihe in the northeast to Changcheng in the southwest. What this line revealed was staggering. To the east of the Huanyang line lies 43% of the country's landmass, but a staggering 94% of its population. To the west is the remaining 57% of the land, home to a mere 6% of China's people. This simple line, drawn almost a century ago, still perfectly explains China's demographic reality today. Nearly every single one of its megacities, famous or not, is packed into the eastern portion. But here's where it gets really interesting. Why is this invisible line so absolute? The answer lies in water and soil. Eastern China is dominated by three colossal river systems that have acted as cradles of its civilization and the engines of its economy. In the north, the Yellow River flows through the North China Plain, a vast, fertile expanse that gave birth to Chinese civilization. It's flat, easy to farm, and has supported a dense population for millennia. This is the home of the capital, Beijing, and its port sister, Tianjin. Further south is China's most important waterway, the Yangtze River. Its basin and delta form an incredibly wealthy and fertile region that is the economic heart of the country. This area alone has a GDP larger than that of Italy, and here you can find the famous Shanghai, but also Nanjing, Hangzhou, and Suzhou, all massive cities in their own right, knitted together into the web of urban life. Finally, in the far south, the Pearl River Delta flows into the South China Sea. This region has become the workshop of the world, a megacity cluster that includes giants like Guangzhou and Shenzhen. These three river systems are the lifeblood of the nation. Even the exceptions prove the rule. The megacities of Chongqing and Chengdu are not on the coast, but they lie within the Sichuan Basin, a lush, fertile bowl protected by a ring of mountains. For thousands of years, this basin has been a prosperous and populous agricultural heartland, a world all to itself. Its geography made it a perfect incubator for large populations. The next part completely changes how you see the map of China. West of the Hu Line, the landscape transforms into one of the most inhospitable on Earth. You are immediately confronted by the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts, vast seas of sand and rock, deserts that look more like the Sahara than anything else. And beyond that, the land abruptly thrusts upward to form the Tibetan Plateau, the roof of the world, where the average elevation is over 4,500 meters. This is a land of thin air and extreme cold, making large-scale agriculture and dense settlement nearly impossible. So the stage was set by nature. China's geography effectively funneled almost 1.4 billion people into an area smaller than the eastern United States. This created the perfect conditions for dense population centers to form. For centuries, however, these were largely agricultural societies, dotted with important, but not gargantuan, cities. What was the spark that ignited this geographic powder keg, transforming these ancient regions into the world's largest collection of megacities? China's geography may have set the stage, cramming nearly 1.4 billion people into a space ripe for urban growth. But for most of its 5,000-year history, China was a nation of farmers, not city dwellers. So what force unleashed the greatest migration in human history and built dozens of megacities at a speed that is almost impossible to comprehend? To start, let's combat some popular myths around China's largely agrarian society pre-industrialization. For centuries, China did have large and sophisticated cities. In fact, at its height, the capital city of Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, was the most populous city on Earth, a cosmopolitan hub at the end of the Silk Road. But it's not wrong to say that China was largely agrarian. Right up until the 1900s, roughly 85% of China's population lived in the countryside, not any sort of city. Then, in 1949, the Communist Revolution brought Mao Zedong into power. One might assume this would kickstart industrialization and urban growth, as it did in the Soviet Union. But what happened next was a game changer, and honestly, it bucked the trend of basically the entire rest of the world. You see, Mao's ideology glorified the peasant farmer. Cities were seen as decadent, corrupt, and dangerously capitalist. So the government didn't just discourage people from moving to the cities, it actively forbade it. They accomplished this with a deceptively simple and powerful tool, the hukou, or household registration system. Introduced in the 1950s, the hukou acted as an internal passport, classifying every citizen as either rural or urban, and tying them to their birthplace. If you were born with a rural hukou, you could not simply pack up and move to Shanghai to find a factory job. You wouldn't have access to housing, healthcare, education for your children, or even government-rationed food. The state built an invisible border around every city, effectively freezing urbanization in place for 3 decades. It was one of the most extensive systems of social control ever devised, holding back a human tide that was desperate for money and opportunities that rural life simply didn't provide in the mid-1900s. But after Mao's death in 1976, a new, more pragmatic leader named Deng Xiaoping took control. Instead of demonizing cities, Deng saw the immense potential of China's workforce and understood that the country's poverty could only be solved through radical economic change. He uttered a phrase that would completely invert Mao's ideology: "To get rich is glorious." And with that, he prepared to bring down China's internal borders. So, starting in 1980, Deng's government established special economic zones in a few carefully selected coastal areas. These were experimental bubbles where the rigid rules of communism were suspended and market forces were allowed to run wild. The most famous of these was a quiet fishing town of 30,000 people called Shenzhen, located just across the border from the booming capitalist hub of Hong Kong. The government poured in resources and invited foreign companies to build factories, promising them an almost limitless supply of cheap labor. To support that labor, they began to relax the hukou system. It wasn't abolished, but a door was cracked open. Millions of young, ambitious people from the poor, rural interior saw their chance. They flooded into Shenzhen, and then into other new economic zones in Guangzhou, Xiamen, and beyond. What followed was an explosion of growth unlike anything the world had ever seen.